Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. We are here this afternoon to get an introduction and a walkthrough and some testimony on H 549, which is an act relating to the siting of outdoor cannabis cultivation. And I want to welcome our bill sponsor and fellow chair to get us started.
Great, thank you. Lori Houghton representing Essex Junction. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to read my very short comments. I want to be clear, Essex Junction is not anti-cannabis, but there is a real conflict between dense housing and outdoor cultivation. It is difficult for a community of 4.6 square miles to achieve both state goals. I don't know if everybody has been to Essex Junction, so I just would like to take a moment to paint our picture. We are a walking community with sidewalks on almost every street. We have 5 schools covering kindergarten through 12th grade that reside in neighborhoods. My own house backs up to our K through 3. Until our school district merged 5 years ago, we did not have busing and all kids walked to school. Probably most still do. Most of our lot sizes are small and most variances between property lines are about 8 feet. We live close to each other. I can normally see what my next door neighbor is cooking for dinner. Density will continue to increase as we have already adopted the zoning changes required by the Home Act of 2023. So Representative Dolan and I, on behalf of and alongside our municipality, are asking that we prohibit outdoor cultivation either based on density or where housing is served by water and sewer. Basically, we are asking for a recognition that outdoor cannabis may not be appropriate in all locations and for clarifying statute that will allow municipalities that meet the criteria to zone appropriately for their community. Thank you.
Chief.
You're talking commercial or private also?
Commercial. So someone who would get an outdoor cultivation license.
We'll hear Ledge Council will walk us through H 549 and we'll learn a little bit more about the posse that Representative Houghton and others have been working on. I think so just to tee things up for the committee, we did some work when we did H270 last year, where we were really trying to say that cannabis cultivation at tier 1, at the smallest of the outdoor license tiers, should be treated like any other commercial agricultural practice. And I think the sponsors of this bill are basically saying that there are places where there are neighborhoods where I think we didn't envision folks getting a commercial cannabis license. And that is, at least in this one instance, happened across the state, but it's not about this one instance. It's about, do we as a state want to have the commercial cannabis cultivation happening in certain places, or do we want to allow municipalities to regulate that under certain circumstances? So that's, I think, where we're at here.
And if I can just add real quick, when we originally legalized marijuana in the state a couple of years ago, the Essex Junction did zone appropriately. So there is an area within Essex Junction that you can, it would still fall within this realm as well.
That's super.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
You, I think, mentioned A or B, served by water and sewer or particular density. Is that an A or B or and?
It is an A or B. So when Representative Dolan and I originally worked with Legislative Council on drafting the bill, we recommended based on density. And then we had conversations with our municipality who actually would prefer sewer and water. And we said we'd like to put them both in the bill and then have the committee determine. And I think Raj Chawla, who is our city council, will talk through the 2 options. And I think he might have sent you some information on why one versus the other.
Any other hands? Thank you very much, Representative Houghton, for doing the intro. So I'd like to invite Legislative Council to walk us through the bill, and then we'll hear from one of the Essex Junction officials. Their city council president's waiting on Zoom, so we can dig into questions about the mechanics of the bill deeper after we've heard that testimony. I believe we had Mr. O'Grady booked for this block, right? Okay, great.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike O'Grady. I'm with the Office of Legislative Counsel. So before we go into the bill, I want to give context for how it evolved to this point and the issues that it is creating. So when you first legalized cannabis cultivation in 2020, you provided in that act that cannabis cultivation was not going to be treated or regulated as farming. Going to be treated as any other commercial activity, cultivation, sale, etc. Except you said that some small cultivators, some small farms could remain in current use because if their cultivation practice was deemed not to be farming, that puts that property at risk of being disqualified from current use. 2 years later, small cultivators came to you again and said, yes, they could still qualify for current use, but they were having issues with the regulation of their property by municipalities or potentially under Act 250, because if their cultivation isn't farming, then it's not exempt from municipal regulation and it's not exempt from Act 250. So just to focus on that point, if you are an activity subject to the required agricultural practices, that activity is not subject to municipal regulation. So it is regulated by the required agricultural practices and not by municipal bylaw. Similarly, if you are farming as defined by Act 250, which is the same definition as what is covered by the RAPs, then you are exempt from Act 250 regulation as well. So the small cultivators came in and said, hey, we're at risk of some of our property, some of our cultivated land being characterized as not as farming. And in addition, when we go to the store to buy all our agricultural inputs or other supplies that we need for farming, we have to say that they're for farming or not for farming. If they're for farming, they're exempt under the sales tax. If they're not for farming, they're subject to the sales. So what the small cultivators ask for is what I call the regulatory benefits of farming. And they ask for 4 of those regulatory benefits. They ask to continue to be allowed to enroll in current use. They ask to be exempt from municipal regulation under bylaw as farming is. They ask to be exempt from Act 250 as farming is, and they ask for the sales tax exemptions, 4 sales tax exemptions that are traditionally afforded to agriculture and farming to be granted to them. You gave those small cultivators those 4 regulatory benefits. The law still says that cultivation is not farming because the regulatory benefits of that farming receive in the state go well beyond 4 benefits. I have a 90-page bill that lays out all of the regulatory benefits that farming receives, including like you don't need license plates on your trucks. You don't need a commercial electrician to wire your barn. You don't need a toilet in your barn, etc. So you gave them 4 of the regulatory benefits, but still said the rest of farming has to comply as a commercial activity would. Well, after the small cultivators received that benefit, the large cultivators, every cultivator wanted those 4 benefits. In addition, in that year or so, there were some issues occurring with the municipalities that were regulating outdoor cultivation. Some municipalities, because of complaints from neighbors or others, were proposing to set setbacks from the property line for cultivation that would have effectively rendered a plot not commercially viable for cultivation. And so there was concern that municipalities could use the zoning authority to regulate away a cannabis cultivator, even though the municipality had at one point approved cannabis establishments within their boundaries. So last year, you gave those 4 regulatory benefits to all cultivators. And you also said in that law that municipalities couldn't regulate the nuisances from the cultivation because they were going to be treated in the same way that nuisances would be treated for farming. So you gave them another regulatory benefit. You said, hey, the right to farm law is going to apply here as well. The right to farm law doesn't mean that no one can ever sue for nuisance. It just means that there's a presumption that if the property owner, the farmer, is complying with the RAPs, that they are not a nuisance. So you gave that to cultivation as well last year. And then you said that municipalities can't exercise any of their municipal authority to effectively regulate away a cultivator.
Representative Chase.
A quick question on the nuisance part. I thought I understood it that that was for legacy farming, but didn't necessarily cover a new farming practice. Like if there was an existing farm that decided to start raising hogs, that would not necessarily.
So there are 4 criteria underneath the right to farm, one of which is that your agricultural practices did not significantly change. So there's an argument that cannabis cultivation is a significant change, but remember that hemp has been an agricultural commodity for several years. And many of the people that are cannabis cultivators were hemp cultivators. And so they would just argue it's the same plant. You haven't significantly changed.
But like switching from corn to cannabis or something like that.
It's more like they would argue switching from one kind of tomato to another kind of tomato.
Sorry, if somebody had previously been growing corn.
Oh, yes.
And decided to switch to cannabis.
Yeah,
would that be
there's
protected
a
or-
greater argument there that they would not qualify for the nuisance. And there are many ways that the nuisance protection can be overcome.
Okay.
So with that said, there were some issues that occurred. You heard from Representative Houghton that their town is looking for some redress, a remedy, and that's because the board, the Cannabis Control Board, basically says that they don't have the authority in their law to prohibit the siting of an applicant, cultivation applicant, based on location other than what you put in on schools, et cetera, screening. They are saying that they don't have that authority to prohibit the siting of a cannabis cultivator where it logically might not be the best place. And there is an example, I'm sure you're going to hear from the town of Essex Junction about that example. And so I won't go into the example. So what the bill then does in H549 in the first section, it gives the Cannabis Control Board the ability to adopt rule that prohibits the siting of a cannabis cultivator in certain areas. And then it specifically sets out the, as Representative Hooper called it, the A or B. And that's also a C. And so you'll see in current law, 7 VSA section 904B, you're on the first page going on to the second page. Cannabis cultivation shall occur only in, on page 2, in the following areas of a municipality when the property is used for outdoor cultivation. So A, an area with a population density below 500 persons per square mile. B, an area that is not served by municipal water and sewer infrastructure, or an area that is not prohibited from cultivation by the board by rule. So there is your A or your B. Then you come to section 2, It's the rules for cultivators, and you will see on page 3, lines 13 through 15, that the board is directed to adopt by rule location or siting requirements for outdoor cultivation, including areas where outdoor cultivation is prohibited because of population density or other criteria. So what does this do for existing licenses? Well, the law that the license was issued to the cultivator is the law that they're operating under. This isn't going to change this. This is not a retroactive law. It does not go back and remove any rights from the licensed cultivator. However, when that cultivator license is up for renewal, the board will have authority to deny that license because it's located in an area with a population density specified, or it's located in an area that's served by water and sewer. I will be clear that an area served by water and sewer is not it's not a very specific term. There is no definition of it, but it is the term, the phrase that's used in the Home Act and is a condition of several provisions in the Home Act. So municipalities should have experience and should know those areas in the municipality that are served by water and sewer as they have been complying with the Home Act.
So following up on your right to farm sort of discussion, water is not generally a big issue. You just drill a hole in the ground. What sewer qualifications would they fall under from health or environmental or wherever? Because you're talking about probably some chemical.
So if it's a residence where people are living, then they have to qualify with A&R's wastewater treatment and on-site rules. But if it is a commercial, it's the barn. Well, the barn has to control every bit of water and wastewater that comes off of that production facility and has to control it on site. So any waste from the barn, any water off the roof, any water off of the corral within the production facility, that all needs to go into the manure pit, or usually the manure pit for the farm. As to human waste, you'll probably see on farms that where they need it, they get porta potties.
Michael, you talked about under the Home Act, there's no definition for being controlled by town or city water and sewer. Are you saying that a lot of towns are starting to address that with, let's say, within a 500-foot area of?
What I'm saying is that the towns know where an area is served by water and sewer. It's most likely because they bill for water and sewer. Those customers have received.
So I just wanted to clarify before I go on to other questions. The way this is constructed right now, it would allow the Cannabis Control Board to adopt rules prohibiting outdoor cultivation under these circumstances. And so it's using in B, an area that is not served by municipal water and sewer infrastructure as saying that's allowed. If it's not served by water and sewer, which then allows the Cannabis Control Board to prohibit cannabis cultivation in places that are served by municipal water and sewer. Am I understanding that correctly?
Largely, the first section actually prohibits the location of outdoor cannabis cultivation in an area with that population density or in an area served by water and sewer. Because it's just like, look, on page 1 going on to page 2, you'll see cultivation shall occur only on property lawfully in possession of the cultivator. You don't need rules for that, right? That is a prohibition. Subdivision 2 on top of page 2, it can only occur in an area that is screened from public view and access is limited. That's not, you don't need rulemaking for that. That's a prohibition. And so 3, it's only allowed in those following areas with a density below 500 persons per square mile and not served by municipal water or sewer, or other areas that the Cannabis Control Board designates by rule. And that's what section 2 is. Section 2 is really how to fill out the detail of subdivision 3C there on page 2.
Okay.
2 questions. The first is back to that water and sewer. If a location had water access but not sewer, they would not be
And
prohibited.
water and sewer, it is a conjunctive. It is.
So they would have to have both. in
They would
order
have to
be-
have both.
Okay.
And that is what was used in the Home Act, to my recollection.
And are there any other general farming practices that have similar restraints as far as not being permitted in similar areas? Like
So no,
cattle or something?
no, because remember that agriculture subject to the RAPs is exempt from municipal regulation.
Okay.
There is authority under the local zoning and planning law to allow municipalities zone agricultural districts. But frankly, that doesn't have a lot of teeth to it. It really is, it basically allows for additional agricultural activities in that district. It doesn't give the municipality the ability to regulate farming in that district.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative.
Yeah, unfortunately, we just dealt with redistricting. Who determines where the square mile is?
That's a good question. It's gonna be about the municipal map. It's gonna be about your map that your municipality maintains and its calculation of population density in that, on those maps.
So you're on the edge of town, the edge of, and this is all unused land and this is all densely populated.
Right?
Thinking those blocks.
Think, you know, I'll just throw an example. Think of Shelburne. There are areas in Shelburne that are going to not be appropriate because they have more than 500 square persons per mile, right? Downtown, the village, et cetera, some of the residential developments surrounding it. But there are areas in Shelburne that are not going to meet this 500 square mile. And so that would be allowed. That would be allowed.
So if I can go back to my question in the sense of the rulemaking process, I mean, it could be perfectly reasonable that the Cannabis Control Board, through their rulemaking process, would say that that area might include if the property is within 500 feet of current water and sewer, right? I mean,
Right, I mean, this is it's a grant of rulemaking authority. There's not a lot of specificity in what they have to address or cannot address. It would give them some discretion in saying what would be prohibited or where it would be allowed. Frankly, from my understanding of how the board and the process that it took the board to get to the rules that it did adopt, there would be a lot of public interest and participation by cultivators and others.
So other questions for Michael about the words on the page? Michael, will you stick around? I'm sure any of the testimony we have on this spark further questions. So Mr. Chawla, are you still with us?
I am, yes, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thanks for being with us today. And if you could introduce yourself for the record and then please give your testimony on H549.
Thank you. I'm Raj Chawla. I'm the City Council President for the City of Essex Junction. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And thanks for doing this. Thanks for making Zoom a possibility. This is great. I have a very brief statement, and I have a very even more brief PowerPoint slide deck to give you a visual idea of what we're talking about. So I'll get to that in a second, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think we have that posted on our page. That's the deck is the legislation metrics.
Nope, that's a slightly different thing, but
Okay,
yep, I'll be brief with it, I promise.
great.
When the state legalized commercial cannabis, and I think you've heard some of this before, municipalities were permitted to use zoning to determine where the business of cultivating cannabis was permitted. In fact, the law stated that each community must include an area for cultivation and may select a zoning district or districts for that use. The city of Essex Junction did just that. We identified a zoning district that included a farm and larger property lots and assigned cultivation to that area. We also identified areas of the community for retail and cannabis processing. With the passage of Act 65, H270 last year, communities no longer have that ability. And I'm here to ask that you restore a community's ability to use zoning to decide where outdoor commercial cultivation of cannabis makes sense and is permitted. We are specifically asking that municipalities that are served by sewer and water infrastructure be allowed to decide where cannabis cultivation is appropriate. We're using municipal water and sewer as described because that is what we're developing under now for the Home Act, and it's sort of what our land development code is based on. Essex Junction is a very dense city. We have nearly 11,000 people in an area of 4.6 square miles. We have a school in nearly every neighborhood, and our residential lot sizes tend to be between 1/8 and 1/2 acre. We have wholeheartedly embraced the state's goals of the Housing Opportunities Made for Everyone Act, the Home Act from last year, and our land development code was already incorporating many of the measures outlined in the Home Act before the Act's passage. In short, we're going to continue to see increased density as we add more people and see more infill and vertical development. We find ourselves dealing with conflicting directives of Act 47 and 65. We have a Tier 1 outdoor cannabis cultivation operation in a residential neighborhood within 500 feet of our high school. This has caused quite a nuisance for the neighbors and has seen some action with our DRB. We're continue to be concerned, for instance, that we'll have no recourse should an operation seek a permit for a yard that abuts a school playground. The odor of cannabis, outdoor cannabis cultivation permeating a school property seems to be misaligned with appropriate public health policy. The prevalence of cannabis cultivation in such a dense environment exposes youth and those in recovery to both potential and real harms. Our recommendation is to alter the changes made in Act 65. The suggested change is to allow municipalities the ability to zone as described. And we're really using the water and sewer as a proxy for an urban area. I can explain in a few minutes some of the issues, pros, mostly cons, and some of the other potential ways to measure density. Please understand also that the proposed changes, a community may use this ability. There's nothing in this that says a community has to use their ability. So this can be applied where necessary. And for your reference, we have further background that defines particular sections of Act 65 that have caused this issue if needed, as well as the review I mentioned of 4 different density metrics and pros and cons with them. And if I can share briefly, I can show you some images that will sort of illustrate what we're talking about. So I'll just do that. And I will keep this brief. You can see this, I hope.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Great. So this is the city looking north along Park Street, 5 corners in the foreground. There's 2 elementary schools.
We just get like.
Sorry?
All
sorry,
we're
yeah.
seeing is your title, the title screen. There we go.
You never want to get too good at using PowerPoint. So this is 5 corners in the foreground. This is the city. There's 2 elementary schools in the upper left, Essex High School on the top. We are a small, as I said, 4 square mile community. We're now about 9,300 people in 2010 and almost 11,000 in 2023. Population density is increasing. This is an example that I mentioned in my statement. This is the K3 Hiawatha Elementary School surrounded by an average 0.18, 0.2 acre lots. All of these surrounding abutting properties are currently eligible for outdoor cannabis cultivation. Another example around the high school. We have 5 school properties in our community, 3 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school. These are the 2 elementary schools closer to the middle of town with the Essex CVE Fairgrounds on the left. The goal of a name, this is kind of the conflict we're talking about between Act 47 and 65. The density communities like ours are being asked to welcome and adopt seems to be at odds with what we're talking about in terms of allowing this commercial operation. We're expecting to see more auxiliary dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, and now quadplexes on many of our properties in the next 5 to 10 years. And certainly more commercial apartment building. These red areas give you an idea of the acreage of many of our lots. And we're going to zoom in on one so you can get an idea of how close some of these actually are to a school playground. This is on School Street, abutting our other K3 elementary school. It's a 0.2 acre lot. And you can see there really is nothing between the K3 playground and a potential operation.
So I just wanted to pause right there if I can, Mr. Challa. I just wanted to confirm, my understanding is that the 500-foot prohibition is still in effect, regardless of what was in the Act 65 didn't change anything about that.
That actually is only applied to retail sales. That does not apply to cultivation. So that would be a great addition that I would wholeheartedly encourage. But it does not currently, because even outside of this, you could have a property, for instance, in a Shelburne, Charlotte, or Ferrisburg, where you could have the same situation without that prohibition. So a perfectly eligible property, agricultural property in Ferrisburg could still butt up against the Ferrisburg Elementary School or Shelburne. So that would be a great addition as well, but that's not why I'm here.
Understood.
I do want to show, I mean, we were talking about, I don't know if you have any questions at this point. That's really all I had to present. I do have backup if you wanted to get into other examples for the issues around population density versus water and sewer.
So I had a quick question from Representative Chase, and then I think we would like to talk about that a little bit. Go ahead, Representative Chase.
Thank you. You mentioned nuisance to neighbors. Is that strictly relegated to smell, or is there other challenges from that are impacting neighbors?
I think it's primarily smell. It might be some activity. There are some ongoing, there is ongoing litigation, so I'm a little hesitant on how much I can really talk about it, unfortunately. Certainly there is the high cost of litigation that this is now, these families are now enduring, but it is primarily smell. There's also a security issue, I think, that the state has acknowledged with all of the rulemaking around what a cultivator or retail establishment must do. So that has presented great concern, I think, for neighbors, that they're now having this risky, what is acknowledged to be a risky operation in the middle of their residential neighborhood. It is primarily smell, though. This is a little bit different than, tomatoes or corn, in that in the last 2 or 3 months of the crop, it's a presence. The odor is just simply a presence. So I think chief complaints are, I no longer have my backyard. I can't use my deck. I don't use my pool. I don't feel like going outside anymore with my pets. That sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
So Representative Houghton had teed up pretty well for us that there's a couple different mechanisms being proposed here in the bill, and that we will have to make some policy choices if we advance 549 or something like it around service by water and sewer or population density. And I know we're always going to want to keep an eye toward, are we creating an entirely new definition, or are we using something that we already are using elsewhere when we're talking about land use? So do you have some thoughts on that you could share with us as a city official?
I do. Our community development director detailed a lot of this in the one of the documents we submitted. I showed an overview very early where I talked about the population numbers of the city. And when you think about Essex Junction, I'll talk about our community right now. We have a lot of difficulty with the population density because pretty much every US Census tract also includes a great deal of open space. We have the CDE. As I mentioned, we have 5 educational facilities, which all feature a vast amount of open space. We have a couple of parks. We have some state land, as well as a large parcel we share with the town, the Tree Farm Athletic Complex. So our population density numbers don't always reflect the actual density in a neighborhood or an area. They're often skewed by open space that might be there, and I suspect that could be the same for many communities. I think there might be something to saying either or. It is difficult in our community to think of an appropriate place that wouldn't have the issues that I described earlier. We identified the zone that we did because we were under the statute. We had to pick one, at least. We couldn't do anything that would have the effect of prohibiting cannabis cultivation. But in reality, a community like ours will have difficulty citing an operation without presenting a fair amount of nuisance to the neighbors, and in many different ways. I can show, you have the document. We don't need to go into it, I don't think right now, unless you want to, but I can bring that map up again and you can sort of see what I'm talking about if you look at an overview of the entire community.
I think, so I've had a chance to take a look at the metrics that you propose, and I think, for the purposes of our initial introduction, we probably don't have to delve too far into the weeds, but I've, committed to you all and Representative Houghton that we would take some additional testimony on that. I think our goal today was to get the issue on the table for the committee to look at. We'll have some conversations about what are the right mechanisms. I have some questions for legislative counsel about some of the policy choices therein and what other, just to put these levers in the context of some of the other things that we've done, like the Home Act. But I think that we'll probably have, I know that there are already other folks that are interested in testifying on this particular proposal. So we'll definitely build this into our conversation around some of our cannabis and land use policy and municipal powers over the next couple of weeks. So I'll definitely let you know when we're going to be back to picking this bill up. But does anybody have any questions for Raj before we let him go? And feel free to stick around on the Zoom. I think I'd love to spend the next few minutes we have until we switch gears with the committee and legislative council. So thanks for being with us, Raj. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
So Michael, do you want to join us again? I have a couple of questions, and I'm sure the committee do as well. You're given all of your experience with this and other related land use policy, I'm sure you can help us with. Are there other places where we're using either of these two definitions? Like, I know we have the water and sewer service is a definition we're using in the Home Act. Is population density something that we have a metric for other?
It has been, the short answer is yes, and and the long answer is it's often proposed, but never really reaches final enactment. But yes, there are other places where population density is part of the law. Like new town centers, things of that kind, with designation of growth centers.
I imagine this construction is similar to the way that those are defined.
I can't say that that's the case for all of them. You know, for growth centers, the municipality needs to have a municipal plan that allows for density design and form. To basically look to no fewer than the average existing density of the surrounding neighborhood at the time of designation. You know, it's definitely a criteria when in some of these programs, but it's not necessarily, you know, a number. 500 square foot per person number or anything like that. Which is in part because of some of the concerns that Mr. Chawla raised. Vermont, so the census, USDA, they both do assessments of whether or not areas in every state are rural or urban. Every county in Vermont is rural except for Chittenden. And when you go to a greater, you know, a more refined, there are areas in Chittenden that are rural. So population density can be difficult as a criteria or factor in a rural state.
So there were a couple of things that Mr. Chawla brought up. One is the idea that Act 65 itself made it hard for the city of Essex Junction to regulate outdoor cultivation. And my understanding of what we did in Act 65 was that the same rules for small cultivators that were in existence prior to last year, we were just adopting for all outdoor cultivators.
You did that, but elsewhere in the bill, you said that municipalities shall not regulate a cannabis establishment in a manner that has the effect of prohibiting the operation of a cannabis establishment. And so that was what I referenced earlier. Some municipalities which had designated cannabis cultivation areas were also putting in setback requirements from the property that effectively made those parcels not commercially viable for cannabis cultivation. So they were using their municipal authority in a way that had the effect of regulating the operation.
All right, so I think the thing that we may not have realized we were doing was even in the places that had already been designated. So what we were trying to do was in the places that had already been designated as an acceptable place for cannabis cultivation by a municipality, we were trying to say, hey, if you've already designated this, you can't have your setback requirements be so extreme that you can't continue to grow cannabis here. But I don't think we understood that as saying, when we passed Act 65, that there was an absolute prohibition on any municipal zoning for cannabis cultivation.
But that's
I understood that.
that's how you regulate farming, right? You wanted to give the cultivators those regulatory benefits of farming. That's how you regulate farming. You don't at the municipal level. You regulate it at the state level. And that's really what the bill is proposing. The bill as drafted keeps that regulatory authority at the state level, the cultivator still has the 4 or 5 regulatory benefits. They're still exempt from municipal regulation. They're still exempt from Act 250 under the bill. What bill does is it vests with the board that authority and tells the board, don't issue a license in an area with that population density. Don't issue a license in an area that's served by water and sewer. And so the municipality still can't regulate that. Still, the 500-foot is still for retail. So you would, the board could somehow say, yes, it's not in water and sewer. Yes, it's in the low population density, but it can be located within 500 square feet of a farm. I mean, everybody that's been through the islands has probably seen that farm where the manure pit is basically in the parking lot of the elementary school, right? And that's not supposed to be there. And the Agency of Ag has been working for years, not the manure pit, it's the silage bunker. It is trying to move that silage bunker away from that boundary because of the issues it's runoff and smell and noise from the operation of when getting things out of the bunker, et cetera, or putting it in. And so those kinds of issues exist with farming. And so if you treat it like farming, you're going to have those kinds of issues. Unless you put other criteria around it, or you go back to giving municipalities some authority.
I see Mr. Chala has his hand up, and I'm not seeing hands from the committee just yet. So, Mr. Chala, did you want to jump in on that?
You know, I wasn't going to. Sorry. I just wonder if, and I've got sort of my community development director in my ear a little bit, but if might be conflating population density with residential unit density, which I'm told is what a lot of the land designation programs are using, and there is a difference. My understanding is limited, admittedly, and we would be happy to get more information to you on that at a later date. But that was sort of, they let me know that, so I wanted to pass that along. You know, residential density might also be an interesting metric to use, and it might be a little more accurate. But again, in that document we provided, there's an explanation of 4. But I just wanted to ask the question if we're conflating population density with residential unit density.
They are 2 different terms.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Representative Chase.
I mean, population density can be kind of tricky to measure, like how many people live in the home today? You know, what about when kids come home for school for the summer? Then population density changes, but it's kind of hard to change the residential density.
Would that be, I'm just getting to the point you're raising, would that be probably calculated based on what each house is like zoned for water usage, right? Like, because it's like each home is regulated for or built for the capacity of, say, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. So that kind of builds that, you know what I mean? Like that kind of creates a little bit more of a static.
So to turn that into a question for Mr. O'Grady, my understanding, these are 2 completely separate criteria. One is the place is served by municipal water and sewer. The other is it's in a place where the population density is so many people per square mile. So you're really just saying in this place where this property is, look at the square mile around it. Is the population density over 500 or less than 500?
Right, but I do, Representative Chase made a point and the Essex government made a point that residential density is, you know, it's potentially built into some of the bylaws for your historic designated areas where the municipal bylaw has to specify or provide for an average existing density or provide a minimum net residential density. And so you can see how people that are planners in government, they already use these bylaws and maybe they want to use residential net density instead of population density. But they're both used. Sometimes it just says density. So it's then subject to interpretation of what it means.
High water, is that?
Thank you. So in one of these areas that we're talking about, if I wanted to grow hemp there, I could just do that free and clear with no,
You wanted to grow hemp that has a cannabis
the non,
dry weight THC 9 of less than 3, you could grow it anywhere
right,
if you were part of the USDA program. The state used to have a hemp growing license,
yeah.
gave that up. Now it's just you have to grow hemp in compliance with the USDA rule.
And does the USDA rule, do you know if it has restrictions on where it can be planted, like in a neighborhood or anything?
Not that I know of, no. Not to the degree that you're talking about.
So when this example, and I don't want to get hung up on like one example. I don't want to make the law for like one particular edge case. But when I first met with some officials from the city of Essex Junction about this and looked at things, it was pretty clear to me that part of the issue here was that it was very hard, it would be very hard in this type of property to be in compliance with all of the other regulations. So set land use aside for a minute, like things like fencing, for instance. And so I think part of what we're going to need to do when we move forward on this bill is with this discussion, because I think it's worth exploring and at least understanding this a little bit and how it exists now for the Cannabis Control Board to consider licensees that might be applying to cultivate inside of what I think most of us would consider kind of a neighborhood, right? So what Mr. Chally was showing us were neighborhoods around schools, lot acres, lot sizes less than half an acre, et cetera. I'm hesitant to create whole new definitions. I'm hesitant to start treating entire industries differently from other like industries. But I think that there's a common understanding that, growing, cultivating 1,000 feet of canopy, pretty dense neighborhood is not exactly what we're envisioning usually when we think about the tier 1 cultivator. So I'm just, I've struggled with this since the question in this particular case from Essex Junction was brought to us, but I want to have a full conversation here, and I'm sure there are other people who are going to want to testify. And Mike, I guess this is probably more like a question for the Cannabis Control Board or for Michelle, but I mean, is it possible? I think it's really difficult on a really small lot for somebody to be able to do all of this. That was part of what made me so confident when we passed some of these measures last year. Was we were talking about places in Charlotte that were clearly on like big lots. This was, you could farm anything on this lot. It looks like a farm. And we didn't want municipalities regulating cannabis so differently from the way they regulate farms. And then I don't know how we exactly got here to the place where we've got to.
You got here because the board issued the license for that property.
Yeah.
And apparently it's possible to profitably cultivate on a parcel of that size with 30 to 50 ducks on the parcel as well. Right? And so I don't want to focus on one example either, but apparently it's commercially viable.
So we'll have some questions for the Cannabis Control Board when we pick this up. So really appreciate your help introducing us to this bill, Michael, as always. And I think we're about 90 seconds away from our scheduled switching of the gears. So we can probably, yeah, we could probably take a deep breath. Okay. I'm kidding. Okay, there's the Nexus thing. All right. Great. Well, I want to welcome former Representative Fagan back to the State House once again. Thank you. Good to see you. And the short guy. Oh, and I didn't see you pass Representative Hooper there. Former Representative Larry Copley.
I missed that duo.
So, Representative Morrissey, did you, I think what we would like to do, after our little bit of back and forth this morning is to have you come and introduce and give us the brief introduction of H794.
Brief, and I'm going to let the experts talk.
Great, and then we would like to give you the time to.
Just to think this used to be room 10.
It still is room 10. It just happens to host our government operations military affairs committee.
We're so lucky. Lots of them. Well, for the record, I'm Representative Mary Morrissey from Bennington, and I'm very pleased that you allowed us to be here today to talk on H794. Many of you were our co-sponsors on this bill, so thank you for that as well. This bill proposes to, for the kind of internal security and public safety for the Vermont Veterans Home. The purpose of the bill is to grant the board, they don't have it right now in statute, where they can even kind of look to think about this initiative, but they would like to be taking care of the veterans around the state that are possibly in rural areas that aren't able to get, aren't at the home yet, but would be able to get assistance or guidance or, I guess I would want to say, kind of oversight care by working with other agencies and other communities but this is kind of setting the stage that they would be allowed even discuss this as a possible plan. Not saying it's there yet, but have to have the plan and going forward in order to do this. But they can at this point really even have a discussion. So this bill kind of opens that up, and then they would do due diligence to the plan to come back as to what that would look like. So I think if that's an okay introduction, I will punt kick it to former member Peter Fagan.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, good morning. Peter Fagan. I'm so used to saying Representative Peter Fagan. I almost did, so I kind of did, didn't I? I am the Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees for the Vermont Veterans Home, and thank you for having us here today. So the issue and the problem is that we feel that statute, and I'll reference it a little bit shortly, is unclear as to allowing us the ability to provide services to veterans in the state of Vermont off property, off the Bennington property. Back a few years ago, the Vermont Veterans Home went through a strategic goal setting process. And I'm just going to read to you the first two strategic goals. Number one is serve more Vermont veterans. And number two is expand geographic reach. Both of those are relevant because absent getting veterans to the Bennington property, it's unclear as to whether we can do that or not, especially the expand geographic reach. H794, which is in your committee, will expressly allow the Vermont Veterans Home to provide services should we decide off property, off the home's property. That's home with a capital H, and that is important. In statute, Title 20, Internal Security, as Representative Morrissey referenced, Chapter 87, starting at Section 1711, It talks about home, the park home for destitute women and children, and home means the Vermont Veterans Home. Home is always capitalized. So home in statute is an actual, because it's always capitalized, it's an actual thing. It's a hard place instead of lowercase home being just I live at home. When you work your way down through statute, you'll find that, as I said, home is capitalized. Go back to here. The 1714 gives us authority to hold title. And as I said, home is capitalized. It's authority to hold the title to the home and received, hold, accept, manage, and convey any interest in real or personal property acquired by the home. Now, why do I keep talking about the home? Because nowhere in statute does it say anything about provide services off property. It says take care of veterans, period. And then it talks about the home, period. It doesn't say take care of veterans at the home, but that's pretty easily understood. It doesn't say take care of veterans off property, hence the question mark. One of the reasons why we feel that it needs to be a little more expressly stated that we're allowed to take care of veterans off property is that, as you know, we're a Dillon state rule. And while Dillon state is specifically granting powers and authorities to municipalities, it could be looked at in the same manner with another state agency. If you don't have the power and authority to do something, do you have that authority? You can't just take it. So we're asking for the ability to have that property to do that, the ability to do that. So give the board the authority to provide services to veterans living in Vermont who do not reside at the home present. And that's what we're asking for. If you work your way down through the bill, which you at some point in time will, many of the statements are continuously repeated because it is the same statement. I'm just going to read it out. So for instance, contract for professional services for the management and operation of the home, as well as provision of care to Vermont veterans who do not reside in the home. What would that allow us to do? Should we decide to do it? And this won't cost anything right now. We don't have any plans to provide services in Newport, pulling a place out of thin air right now. So there's no cost to this bill right now. We would have to come back to the legislature and seek an appropriation should we decide to go that route. But before we put in time to plan something, to coordinate with someone, which costs time and money, and to do all that work, which would in all probability fall on the extraordinarily capable CEO of the home and her staff, we don't want to ask them to do this work until we know that the work could actually start because we have authority to do it. And that's the reason this bill is here. Thank you.
Some more? Just a thought or a question. I don't know if it's crossed through this. Your group, would that be something would be in synergy maybe with the VA, working with the VA? Do you foresee that, Peter?
We have, and you know, I may defer to Melissa, but we work with the VA all the time.
Yes.
Whenever we can coordinate with the VA, we do.
Yeah.
It's just that, again, if it involves, so for example, the VA just opened up a housing place for homeless veterans within the city of Raleigh. It's, I don't know, about 1/10 of a mile from my house. Naturally, I was at the ribbon cutting. We could have, if this bill were already there, been a part of it, either provide services or something. But we don't have that authority. So we were not.
Just give you that.
Yeah, we were not there in actuality, although two of us were there to obviously lend support. And we were there in spirit.
Thank you.
So if I understand it right, there's no prohibition right now on the Vermont Veterans Home doing offsite services, but the fear here is that it could be interpreted as such without us granting this explicit statutory authority.
You are correct. And what I'm definitely and this is what I thought of, and I haven't mentioned it out loud, but what I would be definitely afraid of is that our staff does a lot of work, gets something ready to go, and then turns to the state to pay for it. And the state says either someone in finance and management or someone who is not a part of the state who just doesn't like the idea of us spending money on something they don't feel is in statute, says you can't do that. And it stops us dead in our tracks.
Okay, so essentially just enabling legislation.
Correct. Correct. We want to make sure that it's feasible to do this before we move forward.
I applaud it. It's something I signed on to. It's definitely an example of putting the horse before the cart as opposed to waiting for the cart to go someplace else. It's an interesting sort of phenomenon when you get up into the outer reaches of the state. The farther from Bennington you get, there are veterans who hang out with veterans and would enjoy the service of a veteran organization, but we don't have that specifically beyond the come to the bar at the VFW. So I think it's if we got to the point of deciding, it would be a service that would be well received, particularly Chittenden, Franklin counties.
Representative Chase.
Thank you for bringing this. It sounds pretty straightforward. What other stakeholders are you immediately aware of that you think we should probably hear from?
Certainly, I Ledge Council to ask them just how they didn't say anything to us when we brought the bill forward, when Representative Morrissey brought the bill forward as far as you don't need this, it's already possible to do it. That was not stated. Other than I hadn't thought of anyone else. I guess the easiest way of saying why I'm stumbling. I had not thought of anyone else that you may want to talk to for this. And I'm kind of looking back here for.
Melissa Jackson, CEO of the Vermont Veterans Home. I think after if we decide to go in a different direction, I'm just going to use adult day health for an example. If we decide we're going to build an adult day health in Newport, at that point in time, we would definitely want to be looking at other stakeholders. Adult day in that area, other providers, AHS, Dale. But I think just this general tone of this bill just gives us the opportunity to think and consider options. So I don't necessarily, we're going to stop by and identify other stakeholders as well.
Think of anyone else.
Yeah, because this basically just enables them to have the discussion. It's not at that next step yet, so if it even gets there. But, we want them to have the opportunity to truly have those opportunities to serve our veterans where they can across the state using services or having a service that they can provide themselves, so.
And I will add this, we've just had a market study done of where veterans live in the state of Vermont, what services they receive, and essentially by default, what services they don't receive. It will be finalized this coming February. There's a couple of questions that are still outstanding. There's truly put one in to ask them. And as soon as that's done, it'll give us a little better idea of where needs are. And if we can help to fulfill those needs, that it's exactly something that we would want to explore, and just see what we can do to help our veterans out there in the state.
And for the folks that aren't, I've never been to the home. I know a little bit about what you do.
Asking you to have a field trip and come down and see us, please.
I think that would be a good thing for some of us to do. Wanted to get a sense of sort of how is the home doing? What services are you providing now? And I think one of the things, in that next step that folks across the hall, and I'm sure Human Services and us will all be looking at is the Vermont Veterans Home the place to be providing those additional services? Are we siloing or, creating something new where we already have an existing service provider for those things? So I'm trying to get a sense of.
So if you would like to transition into a discussion with our CEO as far as how the home is doing, I would certainly recommend doing that because some of those questions, while I think I could do a pretty darn good job answering them, she can do a fabulous job answering them.
Great. Well, if you want to give up the chair, I'll invite you to do that. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Pardon?
Ms. Jackson, sorry if I jumped the gun.
Did put him under a little pressure. Again, I'm Melissa Jackson, I'm the CEO of the Vermont Veterans Home. I did share with the committee our budget brief that we did present this morning to appropriations. But I want to start by saying what an incredible team I have the luxury of being in Bennington. We received the US News and World Report's best nursing homes for long-term and short-term care in the country. Only 19% of the homes nationwide receive that. We are continually best in class in all categories when surveyed by Pinnacle. Pinnacle is an organization that we pay. They interview 1/12 of our resident or family population every month. We have a favorability rate of 97%, and out of a 5-point scale, we average about 4.85. So the team down there has done an incredible job through some of the most challenging times in healthcare. So we're the second oldest state veterans home in the country, started in 1887. We do long-term care, which people often refer to as nursing home care, short-term rehab, if you're having a hip replacement, knee replacement, cardiac care, respite care. We do an exorbitant amount of respite care where people are taking care of their loved ones in the community. They need a vacation, they have their health needs, they come and their loved one comes and stays with us for a little while, then goes home. Actually, more often than not, they stay because we're so awesome. We also do outpatient rehab, PT/OT, and speech. And we have hospice and palliative care. And then we have our internationally recognized memory care unit. And then an 8-bed assisted living. So we cross a lot of care areas in Bennington. Unlike other nursing facilities, we care for veterans, their spouses, and Gold Star parents. Does everyone know what a Gold Star parent is? And we receive our income from Medicare, Medicaid, private pay, commercial insurances. And then what sets us apart from other nursing homes is we receive funding from the VA. So if a veteran is deemed 70% or more service connected, disabled by the VA, and needs nursing home care, the VA pays us and there's no out-of-pocket expense to the veteran. They pay us and then screw us on the rest of the look first, right?
What did you say, 70% you said?
Yes.
Okay.
70%. Yeah. So the VA would pay us $501.09 per veteran who fall into that category.
Per
Day.
day.
Thank you. Nothing. I also want to always remind people that obviously when you're going to a nursing home, you see people in wheelchairs and with walkers and needing a lot of assistance. That disability rating is tied back to their time of service. And we anticipate seeing a lot more service-connected vets with the institution of the PACT Act and the impact of burn pits. I'm going to a meeting next week in Washington to meet with the VA starting this year, and then every 5 years that a veteran is with us, and every time a new admission comes in, we have to do a toxic exposure screening. And the VA will determine if that veteran or member may be eligible for veteran health benefits. So we are fortunate enough that we have a veteran service officer that we work very closely with, and that individual will help convert those over to VA benefits. So I'm anticipating a higher census of VA 70% or more service-connected veterans.
Do you have a VSO embedded there? Is that what you're saying?
He is embedded in Bennington. He used to work in the house across the street. He's now out of the Manchester.
But right there within reach, quick
Yeah.
reach. That's
my significant other, so also this recording.
Oh,
Yeah. So, but there's also others. We do work closely with Bob Burke's office, so we do have that ability that as these veterans are identified to make
So
sure.
you work here with Montpelier folks and Montpelier with Bob Burke and all those folks.
Yeah, so, there is a downside to having some veterans be 70% or more service connected disabled, and that's the medication cost. So that $501 is all inclusive, whether or not they have Medicare, Medicaid. We cannot bill any other insurances. What we're seeing is veterans on oral chemo medications, chemotherapy medications that average about $6,000 a month that we have to pay. The Vermont Veterans Home and myself are part of the National Association of State Veterans Homes. While we're in DC, we're going to be pushing some federal legislation to work on some carve outs for those very high medications. This is done under CMS, so we're not looking to, something new federally, but we're looking to get some cost help because the medications are exorbitant. Most of our expenses that you'll see in our budget for medications directly relate to our full cost of care veterans.
And just in case somebody on the committee missed it, that the budget and your slide deck is under your name on today's date.
Yeah. So we had a great conversation about some legislation looking to the future. Right now, the healthcare staffing shortage would be the biggest deterrent for me sitting here and saying, hey, I think we should do X, Y, Z. We have 30 beds offline for two reasons. The first being staffing. We are unable to recruit staff to our building. We use a lot of agency/traveler staff, traveling nursing. And the main reason is, and I've asked my travelers why they don't want to come work for us, is what they're getting paid per hour. They're not concerned about getting sick or retirement benefits. They want that big dollar per hour. As a state employee, we have incredible benefits and we try to share that with them. For example, find the slide. An average rate that we pay an RN, and our employees are state employees covered by the collective bargaining agreement with VSEA, is $63.02 an hour. Where we're paying the agency, we're not exactly sure exactly how much the agency is paying an RN, $78 an hour. The big discrepancy comes when you're looking at your licensed nurses' aides. And if you have ever been in a nursing facility, they do the yeoman's share of the work. They're doing the daily care, the lifting, the transferring, the bathing, the dressing. We pay on average $30 an hour for an LNA, and we're paying our agency $56 an hour. So I could fill those 30 beds tomorrow, but I can't justify the expense on the Vermont taxpayers. This past year, we spent $7 million on agency staff, and with these beds offline, we're looking at 8 or 9 million for FY25. We also are going to be renovating one of our units. If there was a plus out of COVID, one of the few pluses was that the VA gave us grant funding to totally replace a wing. And in the past, I've asked both appropriations committees for construction grant money, and the state would pay 35% of the project. In this instance, we were given $14 million to replace a unit that's in desperate need of replacement. So we're slowly moving residents off that unit with the anticipated construction start date of January of 2025, and hopefully a completion date the year after. I could fill those beds tomorrow. I have a long waiting list. We have a lot of people in crisis that we can't help because of the cost of agency staff and the impact I would be asking you guys to help support.
Yeah, I think you answered it, but again, that 70% disability is service related, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Again, any vet can apply to stay at the home.
Correct. Yes. In the past, when we've had some budget challenges, there's been conversations across various committees about us accepting Medicaid from New York and Massachusetts. We no longer do that, and the reason is very simple. AHS received, what's the number? I want to say 11. The great number, the waiver number.
Oh, 1115 waiver.
Thank you. I always get my numbers screwed up. So what gives us the opportunity to collect our actual costs for our care. So we receive an interim rate of $475. And when they did our most recent cost report, our average cost was $700. So they'll true up that number. Medicare, Medicaid in Vermont, or excuse me, New York and Massachusetts do not do that. Massachusetts was going to pay us $200 a day, and New York was going to pay us $245 per day. And I could not justify asking Vermont taxpayers to subsidize residents that weren't theirs. And it just didn't make great business sense. I realize I take care of people, but those are the decisions I'm entrusted to make. So we no longer take out of state Medicaid for that reason.
Let's elaborate maybe on what Representative Hooper said as well. You know, in my area, I think whether it's collaboration through Dale or whoever, to even let my veteran folks know that there's the opportunity to stay at the Bennington Centers. A lot of folks don't even know that. And I think that collaboration alone would be helpful to a lot of vets.
We had a really robust marketing program. Obviously, COVID put the brakes on that. Now that we're beyond the crisis piece of it, we do have a dedicated marketer who is getting out. But we're also tempering that because the more we tell people about it, the more they want our services, the more we're telling them no. We do try to coordinate other services when we can't help a veteran. The marketing study that former Representative Fagan talked about, there are gaps in services that we could be assisting our veterans with, but will we have the staff to do that? And my recommendation to the board at our upcoming board meeting is that's going to be a goal that we all have to rally around, is how do we recruit and retain and build our own staff before we look at doing something else. That's got to be our number one priority right now.
So Hubert, go ahead.
I don't think we should pass over lightly or ignore the part Melissa mentioned about funding streams. The home has come here, this house, for a long time, looking for even something as seemingly innocent as a door that locks and been turned down, but there's another avenue available because this is a veterans organization to talk directly to the feds and the VA, and that's good for Vermonters. So something like UVMMC that's offering a service someplace would probably be in competition with maybe something that we're doing, but we still might be able to do something with funding that's not available to them through a grant or something else that's only available to a veterans organization. That might be very helpful.
The Veterans Administration is on a national level is really looking outside the box and for pilot programs. So that's where doing the strategic plan, the marketing study that we're doing, and then hopefully having this legislation changed will give us some direction as to where we can go with the appropriate staff to support that. Because there's plenty of opportunities out there that there's a lot more we could be doing for our Vermont veterans.
Any other questions from the committee? So thank you also for bringing us this. I want to learn more and delve into some of the numbers. I think the point you bring up, Representative Hooper, about having the federal funding stream available through the Veterans Home for some of these activities they might want to pursue is well taken. So yeah, this is kind of exciting. I think.
So we do hope that the committee will take it up in a timely manner. They were in the second year of the biennium. So we thank you for your time today.
Great.
Sorry.
One of the things I wanted to ask was if there are other folks we should be hearing from and who your partners in the administration might be that might want to weigh in on this bill. And you don't have to tell me now, but if there are other folks that we should be hearing from.
Necessarily, but I think, if we come to you and say, like I said, we want to do an adult day, those partners and those stakeholders are going to be very important to hear from. I want to invite you all down to visit. And as I tell our prospective family members of our residents, call me and tell me you're standing on the front steps and I'll show you around. And the reason I say that is I want you to see what happens every day. And I don't want anyone to walk away from our facility going, well, she knew I was coming, so everyone was going to be on their best behavior. But if you come unannounced, you see the awesome care and the things that we do every day at the Vets Home. So you're welcome anytime.
Mr. Chair, I'll second that notion because that's exactly what I did. Exactly what I did. And I brought my wife, who was an RN, now retired, with me so that she could look at it from that aspect. We were both impressed.
And I will third that because I'm there on a regular basis. So truly, it's an amazing.
Something to be said
place.
for making an arrangement to go down because the lunches are usually.
Yes. Well, for you, the exact same food we feed our residents, which is phenomenal. Thank you for your time. We do appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for joining us. So committee, we've got a little bit of a break scheduled, so we'll break a little early so that we can talk to
We even
folks.
provided you a.
Absolutely, Representative.
Thank you very much.
Well, we will adjourn